inspiration to me. Laurie, you're an inspiration to me. Like, I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm deeply thankful. I'm a little bit tired. I'm not gonna lie. I've been drinking Muscatel de Setúbal, so I have a little bit of a sugar rush. I have a little bit of a lot of sugar in my blood system because I've been drinking fortified wines for most of the day. So, but it's all good. It's all beautiful. It's all beautiful. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
Well, thank you. So, Bruno, we have another like 10 or 15 people signed up, but we also send out the recording so we know when it's really nice weather like this. Sometimes we get a couple of people that choose to cut the recording later on. Okay. So, Bruno, it's so nice to see you. So just a little background for everybody. Bruno and I met actually in the Republic of Georgia in 2016 on another wine trip with another group of professionals. Ended up, spending the week together, a week and a half or so that we were there, and have really stayed in touch with that entire group of people that we all met together ever since then. So I'm actually going to go ahead. I mean, like I said, I think we'll still have some people signing in, but I think just kind of getting going here is sort of the name of the game, especially since, it's going to be after midnight. Bruno's got to get back to drinking some fortified wine here soon. So we really wanted to do a couple of things. One is we wanted to, at Corkbuzz, we always love supporting our friends, and Bruno certainly is somebody that we really, really want to support and we cherish in the sommelier community in New York City. So he's going to add a lot of perspective here today. And that's really what this is about. Bruno, before you signed on, I was saying, I've been to Lisbon, I, took a day trip to Sintra, and I've studied the wines of Portugal academically. I've taught, classes on Portugal, and every time I have to re-immerse myself in understanding the wines of the region again. And what I really want here is not just the academic perspective, but your perspective of tasting the wines, traveling in these regions, pronouncing correctly the areas, the grape varieties, the regions. I'm going to do my best, but Bruno is going to interrupt me if I pronounce something incorrectly, because it's really important that we, that we show our respect to the culture and to the language, and we learn to pronounce these areas so that we can go out to our local wine shops, we can go out to our local wine bars and ask for these wines and these regions. So you can also catch Bruno. I included his Instagram earlier, and I'll include it again tomorrow with follow-up notes. But please make sure you follow him on Instagram, because you'll get a lot of really, really fun, exciting wine content, not just about the wines of Portugal, but I mean everywhere in the world. Bruno, is there any wine region that you don't talk about?
In the whole world? Listen, like for me it's Portuguese. For me it's Portuguese is it's the backbone of me. Like, my parents were African. Like, when I'm saying why I'm mentioning this, because they were from the colonies of Mozambique and Santa Maria Principe, and that screams like just right there, like the backbone of Portugal in terms of diversity. And we are in the time frame, in the period that we need to expand, and we need to get out of the comfort zone, and we need to check more boxes when it comes down to the world of wine. And I think Portugal easily does that with the backbone of going to India, Brazil, Macau, India, Mozambique, Angola, Cape Verde. Like, that screams a lot what the country is, and easily that screams a lot about like what, when it comes down to wine, when it comes down to food. When you think about Portugal, you think about Italy, Greece. Think about all those kind of Mediterranean countries. It's all about food and wine, wine and food. Like, everything is connected. Everything is connected to past religious conflicts, kingdoms and reigns, and crazy kingdoms and crazy kings. And it's all about that. And that's why my foundation in wine is actually not Portuguese. It's actually Italian. My wine knowledge started with Italian wines, because in order, like, if you can, dig a little bit more about Italian wines in order, like, to understand more Portuguese. Why? Because there's a little bit of unfortunately, that's what I'm here now. And I'd like to clarify a few things about, there's a little bit of gray areas in terms of varietals. What is this? What is that? Like in terms of like what a Grand Reserve means in Portugal is not the same thing that it means in Brunello and in Rioja. It's not the same thing. It's just a quality that doesn't mean requirement of aging. The Superior on a Muscatel de Setúbal doesn't mean that the ABV, the alcohol is going to be higher like in Chianti. No, it's just a quality. So all those things, like all of the tutorials that I'm doing on Instagram, it's about that. Like it's about like the pronunciation. I think it's super important. I think it's important because I feel like, again, the world of wine can easily be affected if we don't understand what a vintage is different from a colheita, if we can explain how the tonies are different. If we keep this thing to ourselves as Psalms, or either just Portuguese keep to ourselves, we're committing like a huge problem. You know, like Port is a beautiful wine, like all the wines coming from Portugal are beautiful wines, and Madeira wines are beautiful, but we need to put the word of wine about these wines by expressing like what the terms are, and let's start like actually by pronouncing them. Why not? You know, like I think like it's, if we can say the Praticats, if we can say all the Grand Crus and Alsace, I think we can say the grape varietals and the wines of Portugal. So we can do it. That's how.
That. By the way, I cannot list all 51 Grand Crus of Alsace. There are just places that my brain stops. So what we're going to do here, just a little education through conversation, as we mentioned, just to like kind of give a little history. And I think, you know, I'm going to let Bruno just go as much as possible, because I think that firsthand experience that you'll hear from him and the passion will be much better than what I could provide for you. But of course, we always need some context to understand these regions, right? So we're talking about the country of Portugal, part of the Iberian Peninsula, longer than it is wide, but quite small, smaller than the entire state of Kentucky. I kind of always like to say at the beginning of classes, I'm going to do this really fast, but you know, I used to say at the beginning of our in-person classes when we did those at Corkbuzz, I would say to the group, what do you think of when I say the Rhone Valley? What do you think of if I say Rioja? And I would ask people to tell me anything that comes to their mind, right? The first word, whether it's the quality or whether it's the grapes or maybe food or a producer. So let's play this game with Portugal. I would love to hear, what do you think of when you think of Portugal? And also, like, think of everything you can think of right now in this next 10 seconds about Portuguese wine. Bruno, you're not included in this. But I'm going to wonder, once you got past Port, once you got past the Douro, once you got past Vinho Verde, once you got past Madeira, are you stuck? You know, now think about a country like France and think about everything that you know about France. I can probably let you go on for another 2-3 minutes, right? And you would still be coming up with things that you know about the wines, the regions, the producers, the food. So we're really not that experienced in what Portugal has to offer, unfortunately, but they make a lot of wine. It's kind of like the last frontier, especially in Western Europe when it comes to the wine. So 600,000 acres of vines, almost what we have in all of California, just over double what we have in Bordeaux, which is kind of crazy, and 11th in terms of world wine production. So they're making wines, we just haven't been drinking enough of them. I think that this is really the issue that we see here. We have a couple of maps that you might find to be a little bit helpful as we begin to move to some of these regions. We're really just talking about the north today. We're going to talk about the south in another class next week. Bruno, do you want to chime in? I thought I saw
Actually, I know that you guys are going to be talking about northern wines from Portugal. I'm actually in the south, but next week I'm going to be in the Douro. I'm going to be in the north, and you guys are going to be talking about southern wines. So it's interesting. But when it comes down to the north, like it comes down like as much as we we on hospitality, we in wine, we don't want to talk about politics, but wine, when we talk about wine, politics comes to surface. Like again, if we talk about like Italian wines, politics like come all over across the board, like from the Great Phoenician Empire to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and go south to how the Spaniards influenced the wine, the grapes, like, and all the deals and contracts that they had to deal, like in the south, for instance, like during the feudal system, was all about politics. We cannot remove ourselves from politics in wine. And Portugal is all about that. Like the north is very different from the south. The south is very influenced by politics in the time frame of Portugal was under a dictatorship for quite a while, for about like 4-5 decades. And basically what happened over there, like we can say that Portugal is doing wine for 2000 years because of the Romans. Even before that, Phoenicians and the Carthaginians, they brought wine viticulture to Portugal, mainly to the Tejo River, to the Tejo wine region. It's quite of an old region, actually. Many people don't know that. But mainly the south, only in the 80s, we can talk about an Alentejano wine, because only in the 80s, when all the European communities started like to bring money like to Portugal, Greece, and Spain, was 86, 87, when the three countries like got in the European community, all this money came to the country. So what Portuguese did, like in Alentejo, Algarve, Lisbon, and Tejo, what they did, they started like to put like a lot of international varieties. So you go to Alentejo, you can see like Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot. You go to Lisbon, you can see Semillon, Chenin Blanc. You can see Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, a little bit of Merlot. You go to Peninsula de Setúbal, you see a lot of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. Why? The same way that the Greeks did. In order, like for us to put ourselves in the map, we need to put international varietals. That came down with a little price. In a certain extent, I think things kind of worked in a little bit, but like mainly in Setúbal, that's what I am right now. In the meantime, just letting you guys know, like I'm in Setúbal, right, like 1 hour south of Lisbon, where they make the beautiful Moscatel de Setúbal. But these regions were very influenced by the co-ops. So think Languedoc. When you think Languedoc, co-ops, it's fairly a political thing. Like community is against, like basically like swimming against the tide when it comes down, like what the market brings to you. And the south of Portugal has been like that. And then the north like always separated themselves a little bit because of the history of the country. So they're fairly different in terms of wine, about the food, and in terms of people. The north of Portugal, like it's very diverse. When you think about the Vinho Verde, of course, we're thinking about like a region that is very influenced by the Atlantic, a huge impact by the Atlantic Ocean. And then you have the Douro Valley, which basically split in 3 sub-regions. And they're very, very different. It's a very important thing to think about the Douro Valley. It's just like us thinking about Bordeaux. And this comes down to a conversation what we think about. A lot of times I'm asked, hey, Bruno, you want to talk like about Portuguese wines? Like we just spoke about Languedoc, we just spoke about Bordeaux and Rioja, but can you talk about like Portugal? Why I have to talk about the entire country? And we should be talking about just Vinho Verde. We should be talking like breaking down the Douro Valley. The Douro Valley is not a square box. It's split in 3, many different styles. It's a region that is known for its fortified wines, but only the still wines only started like in the 80s. Again, for that same kind of reason that I spoke to you about the European community and all the funds. But that's when the DOC came up for the still wines. So still wines is not a new thing. It's not an old thing in terms of wines in the Douro Valley. Ports are. Before the 80s was all about port, like let's say like 75% to 25% for the still wines. Now it's totally the opposite. But now the production is all about still wines, and ports totally decreased. So when you're tasting like white wines from the Douro, it's fairly a new thing, even for me and even for us. We're only producing white wines in the past 20, 25 years. So we're exploring, we're going up and up and up, not only because of climate change. The Douro Valley is very hot. Normally, when you think about the Douro Valley, you think about 9 months of summer and 3 months of hell. It's insanely hot. The diurnal shifts like really play along because of those 3 sub-regions. When you think about the Baixo Corgo, which is fairly close to the Porto city, so you have the Atlantic having a little bit of an influence on the wines. So that plays like a big, as you see, like Baixo Corgo. So Baixo Corgo is close to Porto, to the old Porto city, so it's closer to the Atlantic. So the winds play a big impact. So it's fairly green, very fertile, not as steep, not as wild. Once you go to Cima-Corgo, that's what most of the production comes and where the biggest houses are. And a lot of times what you're going to get, like great concentration on the wines, great depth. A lot of old vines are right here, but starts like to get a little steeper. That's when you see the terraces. That's where like most of the big houses are. Once you go to the Douro Superior, you're getting close to Spain. Gets arid, gets a little more desert, gets more brown, like less vegetation. A lot of old vines over here, like which the wines over here, like, and again, so we're going to talk about we getting hotter and hotter. Douro Valley, like the Douro Superior, like it's experienced a little bit of, I won't say necessarily climate change, because when we think about climate change in the Douro, they've been making wine for 3 centuries, so they know a lot of fluctuations and ups and downs about climate. It's not that they disagree with climate change, but they've seen it, they know it. It's like when you go to Pomerol, like, you know, like Petrus, they know, like, okay, this is going to happen next year, this is what we're going to have, because they know it. And this happens the same thing with the Douro Valley. But the Douro Superior, like it's getting a little more of a challenge because of the heat. You really need to understand like the vines. It's something again that Portuguese are understanding more, like the plant, from the plant to the winemaking, instead of having a team for viniculture and a team for winemaking, something that we still see like in Napa Valley, we still see like in Portugal, but more and more like when you most of the winemaking minds that are coming out of Portugal, they come with a sense of place to understand the vine, understand the plant, mainly the times that we're going through. It's really, really important because Portugal is the place of the art of blending. So when you have the art of blending, you need to understand each varietal, either they're co-planted, that's mainly when you see in the Douro Valley. So when you see Vinhas Velhas, what Vinhas Velhas means old vines. It's not just because they're old. Most likely, mainly in the Douro Valley, means that even white and red varietals are co-planted, and that's the beauty, either port or red still wines in the Douro Valley. In order like to understand that, you need to understand the plant, and you need to understand like which varietals actually can go through and actually can improve. So that work is being done right now, either with white and red varietals. It's super important what's happening with that right now. So you're seeing more white wines coming up because of that research, going up and up. Douro Valley, it's all about schist. Schist slate radiates heat. So that's great for red wines, but that's not great for white. So what you need to go and find how much granite you can find. And the granite, that's where you find your white wines from the Vinho Verde. Vinho Verde is all about granite. You find a little spots of schist, but the Vinho Verde is all about granite. And once you start moving towards the Douro Valley, you start getting more schist. But if you want to plant your white varietals, you need to go up as much as you can to achieve freshness, to achieve like high altitude, and you need a little bit of the granite as much as possible. So if you're seeing a little more and more of white varietals coming from the Douro Valley, it's because of that. Because number one, Portuguese people don't drink that much white wines. And second, it's because there's been an effort to understand what white varietals can. Your ports a lot of times have a great chunk of white varietals because of the Vinhas Velhas, because of the old vines. But in the meantime, there's been research, even in the Douro Valley, to make sparklings. You can see like there's a few producers making sparkling wines from the Douro Valley, something that would be totally out of the box 30 years ago. A few companies started, and one of them actually had the great effort of Hugh Davis, of the Davis family from Schwemsburg. They consulted a great company, one of the greatest producers of still wines in the Douro Valley, and they're making great sparklings because someone decided like to do an internship in Schwemsburg, and there you go. Now they're making great sparklings in Portugal. So it's all about a sense of community. We all here for each other. Oh.
I love the Schramberg wine, so I would be thrilled to try that. And I think that's such an interesting, that was so great, Bruno, because you just like touched on like almost everything I wanted to say. I'm just going back to to Vinho Verde to talk about. Actually, I do want to go over this, but I think it's important what you said about the whites. It's like, name a white wine region in Portugal outside of Vinho Verde. Like really, these are areas, like you said, they're focused on blends. They're focused on a lot of red production. There are a lot of regions that produce red and white, but very few. I know we have a Bucelas, which is outside of Lisbon, focused on Arinto, but let's talk for a minute about the quality system in Portugal, and we'll send out the follow-up notes with all the information in the slide. So if you're like, I want to go back through the history, which he so beautifully outlined, you can do that as well. But I think it's important to talk about the quality system so that we have an idea of what to expect when we're looking for these wines from Portugal. I think one of the things, this is like my personal opinion, but I found it hard to understand what Portugal was about because the system kind of unfairly homogenized the wines of Portugal. We called them port. We call them, rosé from Métis and Lancers, and we kind of homogenize these areas that are so incredibly different in terms of their soil types, and then also the grape varieties that they do offer and the style of blend that they offer. So let's talk about how you might look for the quality system in Portugal. It follows the same rules of the EU as every other member country follows when it comes to their wine. The DOC, with the original system, they call it the DOP today in accordance with EU law. There are 31 DOPs that we talk about within Portugal. This is your highest classification. If you think of this as a bullseye, this is like right at the center, right? These are your areas that have the most stringent laws regarding quality, grape varieties that you can use, how you can make your wine. We also have the IGP system, or in Portugal, we call it the VR, the Vinos Regional. And this is, again, like the DOC and DOP can be used interchangeably by producers, so can IGP and VR. So you might see either on the label, but they really mean the same thing. And this is a larger geographical area, typically with more relaxed regulations regarding how you might make the wine. And that includes like yield, permitted grape varieties. A lot of VRs will permit international grape varieties that you might not see in the DOP. And then also, Bruno, I think I really want you to talk about this because you already touched on it earlier. We do also have kind of a system of aging the wines in Portugal, much like we might see somewhere like Italy, maybe in Spain, that you don't necessarily see somewhere like France, right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
I was just saying we do have a tradition also of aging the wine in Portugal at the estate, which you do see in not every region, but in many you might see the terms on the label that are indicating the style of the wine that you might expect in the bottle. And I always like to say to people, like, forget about memorizing the regulations for Nobre versus Garrafeira versus, Reserva for higher alcohol. Like, forget memorizing the exact numbers and all of these things. And just know that when you see the term, we're talking about longer aging, which gives us more tertiary, complex flavors within the wine itself. And it's typically telling you that this is a wine of a higher quality origin than something that might not have that labeling, that nomenclature on the label.
So when it comes down, like, for instance, like what you're mentioning right here, like with the colheita selecionada, it's just like it's a selection from that harvest year. That's basically it. Yeah, you need like a 1% higher in alcohol, but it's not necessarily that. Like when it comes down to the reserves and the grand reserves in Portugal, it's just quality. It's just meeting the terms of quality that each commission, the Vinho Verde, the Port and Douro Commission, or the Setúbal Commission, like they will, like, once you reach those points, then it's going to be a colheita, and then you can label as a reserve, and then a grand reserve. It has nothing to deal with aging qualities and aging requirements that we think about Brunel and Rioja, for instance, and Piedmont too. So it's not necessarily about that. And a lot of producers, they don't necessarily actually, they know they achieve those requirements, but they don't necessarily put on the label. They feel like, I don't need to put that. It's the style, people know about it. A lot of times, like, can be a little bit of your decision to put the reserve or grand reserve. It's up to you. you can use that like as a little bit of a marketing tool in a certain perspective. But the garrafeira, that's different. The garrafeira, that's an aging requirement. And I would say that mostly garrafeiras you would see like in Bairrada, you would see them in Alentejo too. And it's exactly like that. Like you need 30 months, including 12 in a bottle. So you would see like a lot of times like great producers like Sidónio Souza in cheers to them. They just had a great loss at Sidónio Souza the past month. But Bairrada, it's all about like the garrafeira. That's about like aging requirements. And then of course we can go to port. They have aging requirements when it comes down to vintage, that you need at least 2 years to release your bottle. Not necessarily that needs to be aged in oak, but of course, like, and then for 7 years, like for your collators, that you need that, like, but that's of course, then you have to go through aging requirements for port and even for Madeira too. But for still wines, there's not necessarily aging requirements to in regulations unless you labeling as a garrafeira. And garrafeira can be a little off because garrafeira can mean just your wine store, can be like the place that you store your wines at home, but actually the garrafeira term on the bottle, that's what it means, that all those age requirements that we just spoke about.
Thank you. So I kind of hear you saying that it's really important to learn producers and kind of stick with the producers you know are making quality wines in your style, than necessarily always only look at the what is or isn't on the label itself. Because it sounds like a lot of producers aren't choosing to kind of list the aging that they might put the wines through.
It's mainly right now, like there's a big change in winemaking, like on top of what I said before, of like the past 20 years. But actually right now, I would say that perhaps like 60% of winemakers coming out of school, coming out of college, 60% of them are actually women. And not only that, like it's something that really happens in the country, but what I'm saying with this, I'm not saying like the wines are going to be like this and this and that, but it's something that we are not seeing like in the 90s. It was not happening in the 90s. You barely come across with female winemakers in the 90s, like of course all around the world, let's face it, but mainly in Portugal, like it's really refreshing to see like the diversity that's happening. But not only that, like either sons of producers or new winemakers are coming with the different styles, and that's like, let's push a little notch on the Arinto, like let's not make the Arinto so steely, like let's put just a little bit of oak, let's do some skin content on Alvarinhos. Let's do like a Touriga Nacional vinified as a white. Touriga Nacional can make beautiful sparklings, and many people don't know that. Portugal makes in Tavora-Varosa, a tiny region that's kind of a Trento dock, like in Italy. They make beautiful. They make beautiful sparklings out of. They can make from Tinta Roriz, from Aragonês, Tempranillo. How many producers can you tell me that in Spain are making a sparkling out of Tempranillo? Barely none. In Portugal, they can do that. And that's one of the beauty things that I would suggest you all to explore, like sparklings from Portugal, because like from the north to the south, even in a warm region, like fairly warm region, like Alentejo, producers still find a way with the art of blending. You know, like, yes, we can be truthful in terms of winemaking, that sometimes you correct, not necessarily in the best ways. You can do like other things that you can correct your acidity. You can use like tartaric acid and blah, blah, blah. But the art of blending, the true core of wine in Portugal, it's all about like you use this varietal because because they're old wines. Old wines, they just come like as a bunch, everything it comes together. But for instance, in the Alentejano one, when you go to the south of Portugal in Alentejo, they use Antonvage is going to give you like body. Think your Chardonnay, like brings all that intensity. More and more, you're seeing Alvarinho spreading out the country, which they bring a lot of acidity, like sharpness, steely, like more of a steely kind of profile. So the art of blending in Portugal comes across with that. Like you use this in this varietal. Even if you go to Lisbon and you see Chenin Blanc or see Marsanne and Roussanne, It's because they're using those varietals because someone decided, or it was just the time frame of the country during that time, but they're actually using those varietals to correct. They want to have more acidity, they're using this, they're using this, they're using this. They have Importivo for this and that. They want Syrah for this and this and this. So that comes across like with how the country like uses, they manage. It's pretty impressive how they understand the vine, they understand the plant, they understand the fruit and how they play with it. I think it's seriously impressive. I'm Portuguese, I love my Portuguese wines, but across the country, it's pretty remarkable how they manage to do this. I'm sorry, but it's really remarkable how they do it.
That's great. Peter asked a question in the chat too, and I think you kind of answered the question. Is he's asking about how the quality is defined, but as we're kind of saying, like each one of these, the DOPs or the IGPs, Peter, they have their own set of rules for the region. So
each region has their own set of rules.
The land of blend, most of these regions have a minimum percentage of a certain number of grape varieties that they have to adhere to. So let's say you could grow and make Chardonnay and Vinho Verde, but like you would have to declassify that to the Mino, the larger designation, rather than one that requires the minimum percentage of like Alvarinho or something like that.
Would be a Vinho Regional do Minho, for instance. Yeah. Like if you see on the back label Vinho Regional do Minho, it's either they're using like varietals and not allowed in the sub-regions, and they're not allowed in the region itself, and the same would go to a Dourians wine in the Douro. If you're using Syrah, for instance, that there's a little bit of this craziness in the Douro about Syrah, but even Pinot Noir, because it's not strange. Pinot Noir is not strange in Portugal because the Cistercian monks brought a lot of Pinot Noir, brought a lot of Cabernet Merlot to the down Bairrada, and even the Douro Valley. So you see like a fair amount of Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot in that part because of that. But you cannot. But you can use the same varietals in Alentejo. Like you can use Syrah and Cabernet Sauvignon in its Alentejano wine because the commission allows it to. But you can use Semillon. The region allows you to. But other varietals, most likely is going to be a Vinho Regional of Minho. That's what actually the region it's called. It's called Minho. Vinho Verde, and again, when we talk about Vinho Verde, it's not that the wine is green, it's not that the wine is pretty, it's just because the region is green, fragrant, very verdant. That's why it's called Vinho Verde. It's just because it's very fertile, rains a lot, like the double of Napa, like almost the double of Veneto and Amarone, like rains more than those places. So that's why it's so fertile, and it's a big production wine region. It's fairly like the biggest wine region in terms of production is Vinho Verde, and they opened up a lot of doors for the Portuguese wines. It's Vinho Verde by far.
I've also heard people say that so Vinho Verde is very similar to Rías Baixas just across the Minho River in Spain, and I've heard producers say that in Vinho Verde they make better wine, but Rías Baixas in Spain is just better at marketing it. But I will say, it's like I see definitely more Alvarinho coming from Rías Baixas in the market, but the Vinho Verde wine can be really, really fantastic as well. I know since many of you have the wines that we purchased tonight, so I don't want to let this go without talking a little bit about a couple of the producers that we're discussing today. So this is a more boutique style winery. The vines were planted in 1988. And the winery itself was established in 99. Bruno might have a lot more information on this particular winery than I was able to actually find online. But this is 100% Alvarinho. Usually even the wines of Vinho Verde are blends as well. But in this case, it's coming from a subzone that does require a varietal wine coming from Alvarinho. So you can see that it's up here in the north area of the region, right on the Minho River. So if you were looking over here at Spain, you have Condado de Té, which is another subzone in Spain in Rías Baixas for the Alvarinho grape. Same grape, different area. What do you know about these guys particularly?
So Quinta do Regueiro, actually, it's pretty funny that you guys decided to bring this producer. I was there before the pandemic started. I was just right there, like on a t-shirt, like again, we can go back to climate change, but guess what? Like, I don't remember myself. In the past 3 years, I've been like on a t-shirt on February, and Vinho Verde, it's cold. It's cold. So, but I was over there before the pandemic and the first cases started, and I visited Quinta do Regueiro. It's Paulo Cerdeira. He's a great winemaker. He worked before this at Quinta do Soalheiro, great producer in Monção and Melgaço, actually the first label of Alvarinho in Melgaço. When you think about Monção and Melgaço, they're two towns, Monção and Melgaço, and they're facing the River Minho and facing, as you said, the Condado del Té, and facing these subregions. And that's where the key of Alvarinho is, like it's in Monção and Melgaço. Things are going to be fairly changing soon, because all this time Monção and Melgaço was the only region that could label as Alvarinho in Vinho Verde. But things apparently are going to change. Other regions can label as Alvarinho. But that's why when you turn the bottle and you see Monção and Melgaço, one of the sub-regions, and you can find, it's because it's Alvarinho from Monção and Melgaço. Only Monção and Melgaço was allowed to label that Alvarinho. Other regions couldn't. It would be just a Vinho Verde, even if it was 100% Alvarinho. But this Alvarinho, what happens over here, as you can see on the map, it's very, very peculiar. Because why? Where this Monção and Melgaço is protected by a range of mountains. And it's not as close as the other regions are close to the Atlantic. So these mountains protect the region. And even from Monção and Melgaço, there's a little bit of a fairly difference of altitude. Monção is like closer to the riverbed of the River Minho. So we get more alluvial, get a little more sandy soils. And Melgaço, it's a little higher. So there's a little bit of a disparity in terms of acidity between the two of them, actually. But Quinta do Regueiro, they're located in Melgaço, in the higher part of Monção and Melgaço. I know Portuguese, they don't like to make things easier, like, so they have two towns and you have to break down the two towns, like it's the way it is. But what I would say about like the difference, for instance, like the difference between what Monção, Melgaço and Alvarinho bring to the table differently than Rias Baixas, I would say this. When you think about like Alvarinho, I would tend to think like these subregions, Sotomayor, Salnés, Condado del Té, Ribeira da Lula, they're very close. They're fairly close. Condado del Té not necessarily, but they're facing the Atlantic. You get all that salinity, racy acidity, even rains even higher. The acidity is more off the charts. They're fairly different. They got to get more that tart apple instead of that appley Asian pear that you would find perhaps in Vinho Verde and Monção Melgaço. Monção Melgaço, most likely you go from the traditional, the classic Alvarinho that can go like from jasmine, aromatic, fragrant Alvarinho. But nowadays, like they're giving more like skin contact, batonnage, like surly. They're bringing like different approaches to bring complexity that's not going to be as exotic and tropical. It's going to go like more towards like still like more the appley, like very lime, lemon, not necessarily lychee, guava, papaya. That a little bit of the classic Alvarinho has been, with no fizziness, nothing. Just the classic Alvarinho has been like this, and they're learning something that is quite awesome. Alvarinho, it's not a light wine. Alvarinho is a full body wine and can age tremendously. It has all the potential to age. But one of the differences that in Galicia they use, they tend to use a little more malolactic fermentation in those wines, and less in Portuguese they don't use as much. They're totally different beasts. The wines are rounder, they're bigger in Portugal, but there's more of a wide range, not only in Monção, Melgaço, but across the region, that you see like different expressions of Alvarinho more and more and more, the more that I taste. And this region can make sparklings, can make brandies, they can make rosés, they can make reds, they can make whites. Tell me how many regions in the world can do all this?
The reds are really fantastic. I think, people don't think of Vinho Verde when it, a red wine from this region, but they really can be, I think pretty special. I've had a few of them. They're primarily based, I think, on the Vinão grape, but I also always like to tell people, Bruno, when it comes to, these wines that we're talking about, it's going to be dinner time after this. Maybe they want to have this again when they go and they visit the region, they go to Portugal. What's the best thing to eat, whether when you're there or here in New York City with
I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to surprise you with something. I'm going to surprise you because, like, most likely you would think Vinho Verde, like a producer close to the coast, a region close to the coast, that most likely the people in these neighborhoods would be eating seafood, but actually no. Actually no, it's mountainous. It's a mountainous communities and people and regions that actually eat a lot of meat, despite being close to the sea. They don't actually eat a lot of fish. That's a little bit of something that people think, oh, Vinho Verde people only eat seafood. No, no. In Monção and Melgaço, mainly they eat a lot of lamprey, like the kind of eel that gets stuck like in the walls of the fish tanks and stuff like that. It's something that they eat a lot. Why? And what they drink with, it's fairly a classical pairing and classical dish with vinho. So vinho in the red varietals, Vinho Verde used to be, the production of Vinho Verde back in the time used to be mostly of red wine, not white wine. But the canopy management in the training systems totally, exactly as you're mentioning, totally changed. And one of the key varietals, for instance, right now in the Douro Valley, it's a grape called Sousão, because it brings a lot of acidity and brings a lot of color, which is called Vinhão in Portugal, in Vinho Verde, sorry. But Vinhão, like now, is trying. There's more like research in order like to how to prune, how to harvest, and how to plant vinhão, but other varietals are coming up like Espadeiro, Alvarilhão, Pedral, and Borraçal. So when you see like all these varieties that are on your brandies, when you see all these varietals, they will be on your rosés. So in terms of food, they don't necessarily go for seafood. They go more towards like meats. But what I see from Vinho Verde, starting with Alvarinho, like with all the possibilities of aging, you can do with a pork chop, you can do with clams in the garlic sauce with a lot of olive oil and a lot of garlic and parsley. But you can definitely do some lobster, depending on the structure of your Alvarinho. And this Alvarinho, the way he makes it, this is a producer that is really, really, I'm really thankful that you picked this producer, because he keeps getting awards. He's very, very smart. He's a very talented winemaker. He really understands the varietal. Alvarinho, it's not that easy, but it's a grape that it's pretty plastic in the terms of like, you can do this, you can do that. And that's one of the key things that about Portuguese wine with Alvarinho, that you can do a lot of things with Alvarinho. That's why, no wonder why Bordeaux decided to adopt Alvarinho for their blends, because of that. Age potential, is a fighter, can fight the diseases as a coastal varietal. Alvarinho like plays better once it's in the coast, not only in Portugal, but if you go to Oregon, if you go to Washington, if you go to Maldonado in Uruguay, you see like in the coastal regions, that's what Alvarinho is king. But Alvarinho is being spread like all across the country because of age, because of acid, because all the aromas that Alvarinho can bring. Again, like the foods, like you can go with different, like think about your Riesling and pork. It's Alvarinho, you can do the same thing, like easily can do the same thing. And certain producers, certain styles of Alvarinho, they can go for 20 and 30 years. Yep.
That's very cool. Thank you. I definitely too, like my recommendation probably go-to would have definitely been, I would have talked about seafood. I would have recommended a lot of the same things that we see coming from Galicia and the north. So to hear that is awesome. Like if you don't want to have seafood tonight, you want to have pork with your white wine, go for it. Let's do it. So we actually talked quite a bit. Really, like we've gone through so much already. Like where I would have used these slides to go through, Bruno, you just really organically sort of paint the whole picture about these grape varieties, these regions. I think that that's really cool. That's really kind of the perspective that we love to see. So you talked quite a bit about the Douro already. We talked a little bit about kind of the idea of port as well. You discussed some of that, the 3 subzones. Porto is the DOP for fortified wines, and Douro is the DOP for the still wines of the region. And I think, so we have another, should we talk for a second about port, or should we talk about Mateus for a second?
Actually, we should talk about Mateus.
Let's talk about Mateus.
So you say actually? You say Mateus. It's Mateus.
Thank you.
And actually, I was judging wines, and I judge wines with actually the winemaker for Mateus. And Mateus, it belongs to a huge wine company. It's called Sograp. Sograp, perhaps you've heard like one of the best wines coming out of Portugal called Barca Velha. That's where the wine comes from Sograp. The main winemaker, like the head winemaker, is Luís Sotomayor, but they have Paulo Prior, and I tasted with him. We judged wines 2 days ago together, and he's a winemaker for Mateus. When you think about Mateus and Lancers, these wines, just like White Zinfandel opened up like the wines in the US, these wines opened up for people actually to drink rosés in the US, but they opened up the door for Portuguese wines. So it's not my style of rosé, it's not, but they're honest wines, they're well-made wines by far, but they definitely have they're landmarks in terms of like, they opened up the palate, they opened up people like to drink more Portuguese wines, and I'm very grateful for their work. It's super important to understand what Lancers and Mateus did, like, but the same thing, like for instance, like when you talk about like Vinho Verde, like the Gazelle, the Três Marias, like Good Town, Casal Garcia, all those brands, like that fizziness on the tip of the tongue, not the same one that we're talking about, like with the Quinta do Regueiro, Alvarinho. That's just another. It's a white wine as any other white wine. It's an amazing white wine, but it's a white wine with no fizziness on tip of the tongue. But these companies, they totally put the name of Portugal in the map, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I would kind of compare it to like Blue Nun or Liebfraumilch coming from Germany, the same type of idea, but it really did bring awareness to the region and the wines. And I always say too, like, I've never actually had an opportunity to try it, but I want to, because I think, to understand the context and the history, like, you need to try these wines to know what people think about them and why they think what they do. Like, you love wine, but you've literally never tasted Yellowtail. Like, it's under $10, go buy a bottle and try it, so that at least you have the context of knowing what that's about or what that's like, right? So thank you. I think because it is so historically important as well. Let's just take it. I mean, like, I think we're not going to talk about port for too long. And again, I don't really like to just sit here and like talk numbers this entire class, but I think it's kind of important to talk about the major stylistic differences in port. There's two main overarching styles. Port wine, of course, is fortified. We're adding brandy, right, made from grapes. We're making it stronger. Now, it was a couple of Englishmen who really came to an abbey in Lamigo and discovered this monastery that was fortifying these wines, and it really became popular because they were transporting the wine, stabilizing the wine for transport to England. As we see today, there's still, the port market is dominated by these kind of English shippers that set up house in Oporto as well. But I think today it's important to understand the overarching style of port. So we have Ruby, which tends to be a fresher style that's more fruit dominant in the wine. It can often be much younger than what we find in the tawny style. Oftentimes it's aged in more inert vessels like concrete or steel that preserve a lot of that fruit character. Your tawny style will age in some sort of vessel that lets them oxidize. And that's why you begin to see the tawny color. They're both made from red grapes, right? The tawny style is losing color through aging and oxidation over time. And then as you can see, as we move through the different styles, we have vintage port, which is aged in cask for a very short period of time, and then recommended to age and develop in the bottle for decades. You're going to be responsible for decanting that because of the sediment that it throws at the bottom of the bottle. But something like LBV or late bottled vintage is aged longer in cask before release, and then can be drunk more immediately upon release, and doesn't usually throw as much sediment. Tawny, you don't usually have to worry about a lot of sediment in those wines because of that extended aging in cask. That makes sense, right? Kind of like throw in a little port talk there. I also want to talk about the red wine that we're discussing today. you have any comments about the Almeida family? Funny enough, I didn't connect that to until just now.
Yeah, they're part of my family. I'm kidding. There's plenty of Almeidas in for instance, just the name Almeida, it's most likely related to North Africans, to Muslims. Al. So when you see like a lot of Al in Portugal, like it means like most likely the name is related to North Africans, to Muslims. Just to tell you a little bit like how diverse the country is and how the backbone of the country is, just a little bit. But I just wanted to tell you something about like the not entirely the port wines. They can have some white varietals on their vintage, in their rubies and in their tawnies. If they're coming from old vines, the vines can be completed with different varietals. So you can have like a great portion of white varietals in that mix if the wines are coming from old vines. About the producer, like they have a huge name. Like he's a great winemaker. This is a wine that really that's quite a debate, and I'm coming across that debate where Touriga Nacional comes from in Portugal. Like some people said it's coming from the Down, the people in the Douro, they would say it comes from the Douro, but most likely comes from the Down. When you think about Touriga Nacional, it's pretty floral, and there's a lot of studies right now in terms of like how many clones of Touriga Nacional are. Like it's about like 25 at the moment, and they all like behave like differently. Like as your clones of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay will behave differently in Russian River Valley, and of course in Burgundy, of course in Willamette Valley. But Touriga Nacional is actually not the backbone of the Douro Valley. Touriga Franca is the backbone of the Douro Valley. That's the loved grape, and Touriga Franca, it's actually the mother of Touriga Nacional. But because that's the thing with Touriga Nacional, can be a little can be fairly difficult on the vineyard, like Touriga Franca too. But the results of Touriga Franca are more enjoyable for the winemaker in terms of flavor profile, more tamed tannins. Touriga Nacional can be a little rougher on the edges with tannins, and a lot of times just needs a lot of oak like to tame them. And we're getting to a point like how much tannins do we really want in Portuguese wines? Like we've been using a lot of how much oak we want to use in Portuguese wines. And that's something that a lot of producers are thinking, like how we can tame the tannins, how we can tame like the usage of oak. But it's a great producer, like very renowned, and again comes from the Baixo Corgo, not the hottest region. Great family, their fifth generation family. A great producer that I highly recommend. Like everything they do, like it's very great wines.
Do you have any comments? I'm just curious too, because I always thought my first introduction to like the Douro table wines are the more bombastic, bigger oak styles of dry wines that I would come across, and now I'm beginning to see these really kind of lifted and pretty and wines that sort of celebrate a little bit more, I think, of the grapes and the blend, and not just the hand of winemaking as well. Do you have a comment on, is that a trend, or was I just exposed to the wrong wine to start with?
When you think about like this this wine, like when you think about Touriga Nacional, like, first and foremost, Portugal, as I said before, like it's the art of master of blending. That's what they do. Like the true core of Douro wines, the true core, like even down wines, as much as even you think like Encruzado was only found, I think it had like around 3% of the white varietals in the 70s. And now we all think like Encruzado is the face of the down. No, it's a fairly new varietal to the region. Before Touriga Nacional, Castelão, which is like normally find like in the Setúbal, Lisboa, Tejo, like in the very warmer parts of the country. It needs a lot of sun, needs sandy soils and stuff like that, was the main grape. Then Touriga Nacional came up. I love the fact that producers are making monovarietal wines, like in the Douro, in Alentejo. I like that. I think it's really great, like to understand the potential of the varietal. But the true core of these wines are blends in the Douro, down, and of course with Vinho Verde, of course in the Vinho Verde and Alentejo, it's art of blending. That's what speaks volumes. Touriga Nacional not necessarily is going to resemble what the Douro Valley is on its own. It can't. Needs Touriga Franca, needs Sozão, needs Rufete, needs Tinta Barroca, needs Tinta Francisca, needs Tinta Amarela, needs all these spices, needs all this salt and pepper. That's the true core of the Douro wines.
Do you think that the Douro has more traditionally used oak because they have more established producers with a lot more money than somewhere like the Dow or Alentejo, and because like I see like these kind of more bombastic oak styles of wine, table wine coming from the Douro, but like the Dow, what you're saying is kind of based on, especially the reds, they're the same blends as you're finding just north, right? But these do tend to be, and maybe it has to do with a little bit more of the climate, but I think it has to do with the winemaking, where these do tend to be a little bit softer, fresher styles of wine, a little bit lighter in terms of their persistence on the palate, but still with a lot of that same flavor and same intensity of flavor that you find within the Douro, but without the kind of heaviness of winemaking, if that makes some sense. So I really do love the Dow because they make these wines that are really similar in style, especially based on, Touriga Nacional can be really pretty. I like the white too. I don't see as many of them as I see of the red coming into the US. I don't see a ton of Dow wines as it comes down to it coming into the US, but I do really kind of like this style coming from, some of these subzones. And I see a lot of coming up in Portugal, but I don't know that at the moment they're really of a lot of use to the consumer at this time. But I really like that they're experimenting and trying to figure out what's growing best where.
But you were just talking about something, for instance, like you're talking about oak, and you're talking about the Douro, you're talking about the English. So when the English basically like they faced the Douro, they saw that as a resolution for all the port cities, like we're talking about like Bordeaux. So whatever, like when Bordeaux was making the Claret, because they named Claret because the wines were lighter than port. So they had to name Claret Bordeaux wines just because port wines were like heavier in the color, that the color they had. But the approach that most of the houses in port had, the British houses, most of those houses are based on vintage port. So when you think about vintage port, they want the wines to be released as much as possible because they were merchants. So English, they wanted like 2-3 years, can we please release this? So that's a little bit, because they were merchants, that's what they were. And we are grateful for vintage wines, we love vintage wines. But in the meantime, let me just tell you something, that vintage are only declared by the commission when they feel like, okay, this is a vintage wine. They cannot just be declared like anything. They need to be submitted by the commission. But some of these wines have been like for to drink wines when they're like old, but there's a little bit of something different going on right now that actually producers want you. They're making the wines a little bit like, you can drink this like in 2 years, you can drink like in 1 year. They're trying to make like styles of vintage that you don't have to wait and wait and wait. And let's face it, that in the past 10 years, like we had like probably like 7 or 8 declared vintages, which is awesome. There were decades with very minimal declared vintages, so we're very blessed. But there's a lot of styles of vintage port that you don't have to wait as much as you used to back in the time, because they know like why we continuously going to make this like very like put the wine on a pedestal that we have to wait and everything. Like wine should be drank, one should be shared, one should be for everyone, and not just to be, like have that all that anticipation, which is great, but not necessarily. When you make like different vintages on your property or on your company, like you can make like a style of vintage that you can drink like next year or something like that. So the oak comes along with that in the perspective of making wines. The oak part of the Douro, it's a little bit of that marketing tool that has played, not necessarily sometimes in the best way, but a lot of wines, a lot of people, a lot of times think that port wines have a little bit of that Bordeaux-ish profile. It's not necessarily true. Cistercian monks brought a little bit of that philosophy and profile on wines. A lot of times they feel very Burgundian, not just because the bottle is Burgundian, but you see like a little bit of a style of certain producers. They want to make that finesse. very fun in Burgundy. So that profile of the oak comes a little bit about like how marketing the region has been playing with too. But again, this new generation of winemakers is coming. They're trying to like go away from oak, and they're trying to understand the harvest. They're trying to understand the vintage. They're trying to understand which varietals are actually really able to play with oak when you have sometimes 36 varietals in one bottle. So
I think too, one of the things that's so amazing to me is the wines are so inexpensive. Like I said earlier, kind of like the last frontier. Like here's this country in Western Europe, like hiding in plain sight with really high quality, cheap wine, like inexpensive. Now, when I say, maybe I shouldn't say cheap because I think that gives the impression of poor wine, and that's not what I mean. I mean like inexpensive in terms of, you know, what the consumer is really paying for it here. So this is the last region we're going to talk about, and you kind of touched on it earlier. I think you mentioned, I think you talked about Luís Pato earlier. So moving over to the coast here, we're talking about Bairrada, an area also based on blend, but we're talking about a grape variety that we haven't really discussed so much in some of the more northern areas, which is the grape known as Baga. I really love the wines of Baga that are based on Baga. They age incredibly well. I've had the opportunity to try some wines back to the 80s and 90s coming from this region, and like they hold up. Like these wines hold up. What's your opinion on Baga?
So Bairrada, it's a beautiful region. It's perhaps my favorite region, and honestly, like Bairrada is basically like 2 hours up, 2 hours north of Lisbon. It's fairly close. Where I am right now, like I feel like I'm far away. I'm 1 hour south of Lisbon. So when you come to Lisbon, everything is close by. Like again, as we said before, like it's smaller than Kentucky. But with Bairrada, which is super amazing, and of course Baga is the main grape, but you still find a lot of blends, and a lot of times Baga is the predominant varietal. But how I see Baga, it's a little bit like when Pinot Noir decides like to put some high heels, and the next day decides to put some combat boots. You know, like has different sides, has different styles, and that's the beauty. Like why we like so much Pinot Noir in Burgundy, how it reflects how Pinot Noir, like in Sonoma, how different, like has these many faces, and Baga does that in a very, 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 very tiny region, very coastal. They're affected by the Atlantic winds coming very close by. Fairly flat, very flat, very sandy calcareous soils where Baga really loves. But Baga has a temper, as I said before, so you need to plant like accordingly. So that's why we have like different styles of Baga. All these producers in a very tiny region, they come up with different styles. When Luís Pato came out in the 80s, he was a modern guy, and nowadays he's not that much of a modern guy. Like now modern, like it's a different perspective. But he definitely placed the word of Baga in the world, and he did a tremendous job, and I love him. He's a great inspiration, and he's one of the faces of Portuguese wine. And I was just with him like 2 days ago, and but there's other varietals that lift Baga in a certain way, even with white varietals. Sometimes there's some white varietals mixed with reds too. Great sparklings coming out of Bairrada. But again, if you love your Nebbiolo, if you love your Pinot Noir, you definitely need to consider Baga, because it just falls on that spectrum. How can go from this to this, depending where it's planted. And it's a beautiful region. It's a tiny region. Love them because all the producers that are together, something that you don't necessarily see a lot in Portugal, but they're very united. The producers are very united. They want diversity, like you do your thing, I do my thing. We're all going to respect each other. We're still going to respect the place and the varietal. So that's one of the beautiful things. You're talking about Luís Pato, but you taste it. Felipa Pato, his daughter, her wines are totally different. They're totally different, but they still scream Baga. So there you go.
Well, I love that when you have, you know, these wine regions where you really see the producers that realize that like one producer's failure is the failure of the whole region, and one producer's success is the success of the whole region, and everyone said it.
Exactly. Luís Pato just got 97 points for his Quinta do Ribeirinho 2015, and everyone was congratulating him, like, hey, congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. I'm not crazy about scores, but I love the fact that everyone like celebrated him. Like, you're putting the name of Baga, you're putting the name of the region. That's great. We celebrate you, and they're truthful to that statement, and I love that. I think it's very good. And Bagas are beautiful wines. Like, we didn't actually talk about the pairings with still reds from the Douro, but the south of Portugal, the cuisine is fairly different. Closer to Africa, there's been like more crossing of people and invaders, and everyone brought something to the south of Portugal, not as much in the north. So think about like it's more like wide open, like the food in the south. In the north tends to be a little more mechanical. People had to eat, like they were like laborers, they were like peasants, they were farmers. So like not necessarily there was a culture of like making, like cuisine. It was not necessarily like very predominant, not as much as in the south. So think about your grilled meats, your stewed meats. You can think about even like ossobuco kind of style. We do a lot of that, like in the northern part of Bairrada, and there's a lot of that lamb, like stewed lamb, like all that, those kind of meats. Think about like that, but not necessarily Touriga. But Touriga Nacional even sometimes can go like with a baked cod, like in a tomato sauce, like in lots of onions and olives and something like that. You can go with something like that, like fresh piece of cod, not salted. Salted cod in a tannic wine is not going to be good, but a fresh piece of cod, which is the main fish and the main protein, I would say actually in Portugal is very important. But once you go to Bairrada, like they eat a lot of suckling pig. It's the traditional dish. Actually, there's a tradition of eating suckling pig with drinking with sparkling wines. There's a huge tradition of sparkling wines in Bairrada. And actually, Baga is a varietal that is actually vinified as a white and makes beautiful sparklings. But Bical, which is it's a white varietal, makes beautiful sparklings too. And then Erinto plays really well with steely, like very focused flavors and beautiful acidity and great potential to age. Erinto plays really well in the region too, either for sparklings or still wines.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to have suckling pig and sparkling wine for dinner. Thank you. You've inspired me. Dinner's coming up. I know for you, bedtime's coming up, or maybe getting back to drinking some more fortified wines. I just really want to say thank you for joining us today. This has been really fun. It's really fun for me to not be the one talking for an entire hour. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to hear from you, because you really just, the way you, I said, kind of interwove all of this information into the storytelling of these areas of Portugal was really cool. For everybody that's still here with us, we'll send out a copy of the recording, of course. I'm going to send out notes from the slide. So if you want to go back and review any of that information that we had, that will be there for you as well. Any questions before we let people get away for dinner? And it sounds like, I know Scott and Angelique, sounds like you're really enjoying the wine. So
I would just tell you, like we didn't touch base with the Tras-os-Montes as a northern region. Tras-os-Montes, like it's very diverse in terms of soil types. They go back like to the they go way back than even their volcanic base on their soils in Tras-os-Montes, but they scream a little bit of the Douro approach. That's just an extension that actually see grapes like Bastardo, like Trousseau starts to grow over there, like in the not necessarily Touriga Nacional, but Touriga Franca, Tita Barroca, Rufete. It's a great region. It's a very interesting region that's very remote in the middle, not in the middle, but it's like way far away. It's been forgotten for a long time, but I think you should consider a lot. I saw that next time Colares, but it's definitely true. That's where I kind of I grew up close by. I'm a huge fan of Colares. Colares is very similar to Bug in terms of like you need patience. He has a temper. You need patience to understand. He needs time to age in the bottle and in the barrel. So, but I think Portuguese are very resilient. I think Mediterraneans are very resilient, and that screams a lot in the wines. You need patience to understand the wines. You need to understand patience to understand these wines, and I think that's one of the beauties of the country. Not everyone can do that. Not every producer can like have patience to store their wines and wait. But Colares and Colares wines, it's all about that, having patience to understand those wines.
Well, next week we're having to talk about Southern Portugal. We will talk about Colares, and we're going to be drinking Antonio Bernardino, Paulo de Silva, the 99. So coming from Colares. So we still have a couple bottles left in the cellar, but those will probably go pretty quick. So for those of you that have them or have them on the way, I think you'll be really happy. I corvined a little bit of a bottle last week, and I was really, really happy with the results. So, all right, everybody. Bruno, thank you so much. This has been absolutely incredible. Your knowledge, your expertise, your professionalism. Thank you so much. All right, obrigado.
Obrigado.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.